Well, welcome to the Mad Men Pod. And look, we've got a special guest today, Jeff Mack, joining me all the way from the Northeast. Jeff, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. First day of school here in New Jersey, so it's nice to not have little ones running by the door. So me and my wife were saying it feels like a new day today, right? We got them off to school, and now she called out sick today. She is sick, so if her boss is listening, she is actually sick. But it's weird to not have screaming running through the house. So we're doing well here in New Jersey in the Northeast.
I know we started a few weeks ago. I don't know if you know, my wife's a teacher, right? So it's like everybody goes to school when they're school, so it's awesome in the house. And when I'm working and I work twice, 2 days from home, so it's nice. But it gets calm and a little collective, and I can go do like cook my own lunch or something. I don't know, like it's a nice thing to have when there's nobody home running around doing things.
It is fortress of solitude, man.
And then it is, but I'm not even going to try to introduce you and your background because I went through your list and you've got so much talent in here. So guys, y'all are up for something. We're going to talk about growth hacking and demand generation and marketing from a perspective of a guy who's built multiple brands, worked with multiple industries. So before we get started, Jeff, why don't you do an introduction to yourself and then we'll get the pod going.
Men go mad.
Who's gone mad?
Mad Men.
You're mad.
The man's mad.
Mad Men.
I'm mad.
Yeah, totally. So as Salim said, Jeff Mack. My friends call me Jeff. My mom calls me Jeffrey. But I say I'm a revenue-minded creative marketer, and I put that word creative in there because we'll probably talk about this later. I do feel that marketing in 2024 sort of is missing a little bit of the creativity that was a hallmark. This is the Mad Men podcast. I'm going to assume you're a fan of the old television show Mad Men and Don Draper, as am I, right? The dream job is to be Don Draper. But the reality is today in the marketing world, at the very least, a lot of people coming into the profession are coming in armed with Excel spreadsheets and no longer armed with pen and paper, right? So that's why I like to say I'm a revenue-minded creative marketer. But I started my career in sales, first selling designer clothing to like the 1%, and then selling online brokerage accounts. Like that was sort of my move into tech at a FinServe tech company. And then I shifted over to marketing when I displayed just a knack for knowing how to use the internet to sell things, right? And not going to date myself, but there was a time when, believe it or not, the internet wasn't really used in the way that it's used today from a marketing perspective. And I very quickly understood sort of how that worked, and got a call from my boss at that time, when I was in sales, and brought me into the office. Said, "Hey, dude, great job closing all these accounts. Like I set all these records." And he said, "We're going to move you to marketing because you understand this internet thing." And I always joke with people and say, the reason that they moved me to marketing is because they didn't want to pay me my commissions as a salesperson. And that's we could have a whole other episode talking about marketing compensation as it relates to our sales friends. But that was my move into marketing. And in my career, I've had the good fortune to work at some awesome companies like LinkedIn, where I sort of led account-based marketing efforts there. I worked at HSBC on the commercial bank, where I brought in sort of the whole inbound strategy and demand gen there. Before I got there, they were old school, right? Shoes on the ground, you go out there all outbound to drive business. And then I was at a company called Crestron, which was like a content marketer's dream. And then a bunch of smaller companies where I was a big part of their growth stories. So I consider myself to be a pretty well-rounded marketer. So this conversation may go to a bunch of different places. But if I had to characterize my biggest strengths, I'd probably say pretty good at growth and demand gen, which is where we're going to focus a lot of the conversation. Pretty good at building brands, and pretty good at positioning or telling the story, right? I think that storytelling angle is a really critical piece. Which brings me to an interesting story, which I promise is relevant, and then I'll shut up. But over the weekend, I was cleaning out my basement, and I found my old high school yearbook, right? Which is really interesting because I haven't looked at that thing probably since college, so a really, really long time ago. And it was really interesting to go back, and I advise you to do this if you can. Right?
Yeah.
Go back.
I don't know if you can see, but all my real books are like literally right there.
Well, yeah, go back and read the things that people write about you, right? Read the things that your classmates write about you, because whether you realize it or not, what's written in your book is essentially what your personal brand was at that time, right? It's sort of what you were known for. And when I read them, going through them, I found that there was a common thread, and the thread that I saw in nearly almost everything that was written in there was around people like wishing me luck in film school, mind you, I didn't go to film school, right? Or looking forward to me winning an Oscar or being the next Spielberg. And that was really interesting because, this goes back to when I was a kid. I was always the guy that had the video camera, with me, and I was making movies or, recruiting the neighborhood kids, or recruiting my high school or my school, friends to be in my movies. So I was always making them. I was always sort of telling these stories. And, it was interesting because at a very early age, I learned that a good story could get people to do things, right, or feel things. And that's, you look back to sort of what you were as a child and how it influenced what you became today. And I look at myself as a marketer, and it's interesting to me because that's basically what I do for a living, right? I tell stories to get people to do things. So yeah, if you haven't looked at your yearbook in a long time, go back, see what people wrote about you, and then just see how different you are as a person today or how similar, right? And I think a lot of people will see that there is a sort of a common thread that probably has stayed with you.
And for the listeners that don't know how me and Jeff know each other, right? So me and Jeff are part of this mentorship group that a famous buddy of ours, Musa Tariq, started a little while back, and he put us all these, really, really creative and very unique marketers together in a room. And the first thing he teaches us is that story, right? It's like, hey, what is your 0 to 20 story? And it's not like, hey, what are you doing today? Where you are tomorrow? But it's really much about, hey, how did you get here as a child? Right, or at a young adolescence, and saying, hey, look, how did that make you who you are today? And you're right on, right? Whatever your brand was back in high school, it kind of different variations of it, right? Basically, you're a content creator, storyteller. You still are that front, and it's interesting to see how that's propelled out. But I want to double down on one of your things, right? This creative idea, right? And I'm a big fan of creativeness and the idea of it making you do things, right? The decision making, right? 80% of people buy on emotion and then justify the 20% later about, hey, why did I buy this, right? That's why you have all these click to buy ads, and you got the TikTok shops working and all that stuff. So help me drive that. You talk about a growth marketer, right? And saying how that works, but help me understand your perspective of creativity leading to sale revenue, right? That's a very important topic that it's hard to justify in today's world because it is, you're right, it is backwards today.
Yeah. I mean, I think at its core, right, it's, I don't think this is like a controversial take, but I think in 2024, marketing, or at least the way people buy things, is very different than it was even just a few years ago, right? And I think from a marketing lens, it's become very commoditized, right? I mean, I think you have a lot of marketers who are coming in, and Andy mentioned this, right, that are very analytical, that come armed with Excel spreadsheets and pivot tables. And when it comes to what they do or the campaigns they create, they lean heavily on these playbooks that are given to them from vendors, right? And anything a vendor tells you to do, you need to take with a grain of salt, right? I mean, I think if you were to listen to Google about what they would recommend you do for Google ads, you would be spending a lot of money, right? So, and the same thing even on like the growth side of things. I mean, you have vendors like HubSpot, like 6 Sense, like just a lot of people out there, ZoomInfo, right? Like they all will provide you with a nice little playbook as a marketer that tries to justify the reason that their solution exists for the most part, right? So what you end up getting is you get a lot of people that are running the same playbooks, and you get a lot of people that are using the same tools, and a lot of people that are accessing the same data, and you get a monotony of sort of marketing out there. And I think in 2024 especially, the chances that you have when you're in front of a potential customer, are becoming less and less. Traditional advertising still there, but I think people are just glancing, or they're just they're trained to just overlook. They go by it so quickly, they don't really absorb it. So it's really, really difficult. So in sort of the day and age where we are, where everything is the same, I'm a firm believer that creativity is company's competitive advantage. It's your advantage as a marketer, because that creativity could be the one thing that gets somebody to actually pause, right, on your ad or pause on your social post. It could be the one thing that gets somebody to say, that's different, right? Or, that's pretty neat. So, I think that marketers and brands, they need to, figure out a way to promote this idea of being creative and doing things a little bit differently. Like I have a phrase that I usually talk about with my teams or the companies that I consult with. And, I say, you need to find your weird. And what I mean by that is like, what's the one thing that makes you different than everybody else that's out there, right? It doesn't mean that you have to be weird, but there needs to be at least one thing that sets you apart. And it's really imperative and critical for you to make sure that that thing is woven into sort of your campaigns, your messaging, your story, so that you have that opportunity to stand out.
So talking about that weird or that storytelling, right? The idea is kind of who you are as a company or your brand, right? So talk to me a little bit about like the idea that a lot of these guys are focusing on like the old like Apple versus Mac concept, right? Or Apple versus Microsoft concept. Like it's always this like, hey, I do this better than so and so versus saying like, hey, I just do this. Like I'm really good at, Dollar Shave. I'm really good at cheap shaving blades, right? Like, what is it? Men's wipes thing that like they make $1 billion company out of just men's wipes and liquid death to doing water, right? Like, talk to me about how that mindset is different and how we can generate that conversation versus the, hey, I'm just better than the other guy.
Well, yeah, I think you just said it right. So it doesn't necessarily need to be that I'm better than the other guy, right? It could be that I maybe do one thing better, but I think you could actually have success, and maybe you wouldn't say it this way, but I think you could have success saying I'm different than the other guy, right? Okay. And here's how I'm different, because I'm sure there's scientific evidence that backs this up. I don't know what it is.
We'll Google. We'll ask ChatGPT after.
Yeah, we'll ask later. We'll ask ChatGPT. But apples to apples, people are gonna, and no pun intended, we're talking about Apple versus Windows. But apples to apples, people are people. Whether they're buying B2B software or consumer good, people are people. They're gonna buy what they perceive to be cool, right? Different sometimes is cool. So finding that little lever, that could go a really, really long way. I mean, I was just consulting with a company where we entered a very crowded space in the construction technology industry, and we had a brand that nobody had heard of, brand new to the market. And we were going up against these behemoths, companies that were 100 times the size. We had a lot of success just by telling people how we were different, right? Like we didn't claim to be the better version of this or the better version of that. We didn't claim to do everything that those companies did, which is a common pitfall, right? A lot of times when you go to market with a new product, you try to say, hey, you do what they do, right? But we're cheaper. Maybe that's what you say is your difference. I don't know that that's a great strategy, right? Like we went to market and we said, hey, we do part of what they do, but we do that part really, really well, right? And oh, by the way, we let you do it in your web browser. Like that was our differentiator, and we had tremendous take up. But it took a while for us to get there, because when we first started coming to market, we did what every other brand typically does, which is say, hey, we are a competitor of them. Like you sort of think of yourself as a competitor to another company first before you actually think about how you're different than that competitor. I found that to be the case many, many times. So
as a growth marketer, right? I've heard of you, exiting companies 100, 200%. And like, what is giving that mindset, right? Like you just talked about, right? Like differentiate yourself. I guess what are the fundamental things you would tell a young marketer today and saying, hey, look, if you're trying to, let's call it, I don't know if hacking is the right word, because it gets used a lot.
Let's not say hacking. We're going to use common sense.
And maybe that's what it is. It's common sense is hacking today 100%. In today's world, because common sense is overrated.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm a marketer who thinks that marketing, and I'm saying marketing a lot, it's a little cheesy, right? Like you go back a few years, there's always a rage, right? So like a few years back, the rage was account-based marketing, right? Like, dude, account-based marketing is literally just good marketing. Like that's what it is, right? Growth hacking. Like growth hacking is also good marketing. Yeah, but I would say like if you're a new marketer coming in, and where I've seen success, especially in more recent times, just using common sense and just simplifying the process, right? So typically what I would do, when I have a new engagement or if I were to join a new company, is first, there's no playbook that translates from one company to the other. I've learned that, right? Like you have some executives who they're like, I have a playbook, I'm gonna bring it with me, like hire me, here comes my playbook. Well, like I found that doesn't work, right? Like you can take bits from different playbooks and sort of formulate a new playbook, but I think any new opportunity you have, you need to sort of create a new playbook. So that's just the first thing. But I think after that, I think a lot of it is just using common sense, and by that I mean think about things in very simple terms, right? So if you think about, hey, new software company coming to market, okay, amazing, right? You need to make sure that as a company we know who we are and we know who we can help. So, asking yourself the questions like, what does my product do? How does it help? Who does it help? And notice I said how before the who, because I think that's important. Yep. And I think, understanding that audience is critical. We were joking before when we were chatting about an industry I know nothing about, but I said, hey, I could become an expert in that industry pretty quickly, because I do think that that's the most important thing that you can do as a marketer. You need to sort of, really embed yourself and understand as much as you potentially can about the industry or space or the people that you're going to be marketing your product to or selling your product to, right? So that's one thing. And then when you sort of understand that core of people, you need to understand that you can't treat it as just one core, right? Which is something that I see a lot of companies make that mistake. They're like, hey, we know our ICP. Here's what we're going to do, right? And then, hey, we're not getting the outcomes that we expected. And I'll talk to them and say, well, what are you expecting? And their expectation is always like a sale. We're expecting a demo booked, right? And it's like, well, that's an expectation for one thing. That's an expectation for ICP or your market. That's in market. People that are looking to buy something right now. Hey, that makes sense. If somebody's looking to buy something right now, yes, you're going to measure your success on the outcome of them buying that thing. The reality is that on any given day, when you look at your audience, 3% of those people are actually looking to buy something right now, right?
Yep.
Maybe 5%. So you have 95% of your audience that, unfortunately, a lot of companies, and this goes up the ladder to the executive team, they're not looking to measure outcomes on that biggest portion of your audience, right? Like, they're just looking at how many leads are you bringing in, what pipeline are you generating, and ultimately, what does that translate into a revenue standpoint? Like, they're unfortunately looking at the short-term outcome when they also need to be looking at the longer-term outcome, and they need to be looking at the outcome that you're going to drive for the people that are going to be future buyers, right? And I think turning someone who's not interested in buying something right now into an in-market buyer right now is very, very, very difficult in 2024. I think you need to sort of let those people get there on their own. I mean, maybe you can nudge them a little bit, but I don't think you can take someone from 0 to 1 in just through creative marketing in one touch, right?
You know, and you make a good point, right? Because there's a big research, and I'm trying to find it, but I can't find it right now. But it basically says that most people aren't looking to buy today, but the Harvard Business Study shows that, hey, the guys that are going to go buy tomorrow already know which brand they're going to go with 90% of the time or 80% of the time, right? So what I guess in your concept, what can you tell them about, hey, what should they be doing? And how do they justify that today, right? So there's two parts to that question, right? Saying, hey, look, today you should be doing this because I want to be that 90% later. But I've got to go back to the board who, every quarter has to submit numbers, right? And saying, hey, what does that number look like? But I'm going to say, hey, look, I'm going to invest in, let's call it $500,000 this quarter on just exposure and awareness and the other fragments of the conversation to drive that eventual deal next quarter.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's level setting expectations, right? So yes, to your point, I need to report to the board. So there is an expectation of an outcome that is a sale, right, or is a new user acquired, or whatever. And I think that's really important. And oftentimes, the companies that I'm either advising or working at, that is sort of priority number one, right? So when I get someplace and I sit down and I say, okay, listen, the first thing that we're going to do after we sort of do the little framework of knowing who we are as a company, how do we help, who do we help, all of that stuff. Once we nail that story and sort of bake that weird into there and all of that, yeah, priority number one is we need to close business, we need to generate pipeline, and we need to get revenue. So I tend to sort of put my efforts and attention towards the in-market buyers first, right? There is demand for your product that's already been generated. Probably been generated by a competitor, which is fine, right? Like, let them do the heavy lifting. But I think for you to be successful as a company, you need to be really, really good at capturing that existing demand, right? So for me, what does that look like? Well, okay, if we're going to launch a Google search program, we're going to focus on the bottom of the funnel. We're going to look for the higher intent searches and try to find the people that are in market. And that's who we're going to spend money towards. That's who we're going to spend effort. We're going to spend time. Because the name of the game is we need to bring them into the funnel. We need to close them, right? So, hey, I get it. Those people that are in market, let's focus on them. Let's be really, really good at making sure that we can get them into our funnel. What's really interesting for those people is that maybe 9 times out of 10, to your point, they've already decided in their mind who they're going to buy from, right? It's the brand that they recall is the brand that they buy from. So it's hard because you need to sort of do something immediate to sort of jump into their consideration set. But again, focus on those people that are in market, and then you have an expectation, you have goals, you have KPIs that you can bring to the board. That being said, I think, bringing up the common sense that not everybody's in market, that we're going to have to sort of cultivate and build a community of engaged prospects over time. There needs to be a goal set there, and it can't be just a combined goal of the two, right? So You can have your bottom of the funnel stuff that you do, your campaigns, whatever. Your outcomes are going to be more of those traditional outcomes that the board cares about. But you need to also do sort of top of funnel stuff. You need to sort of convince people, right? Like marketing is about convincing, right? The stories are about convincing. Executives want you to convince someone to buy something. That's great. But for those people that aren't in market, you need to convince them that they have a problem sometimes. Sometimes they don't even know that they have a problem. You need to convince them that there's a solution that exists out there, right? You need to convince them that your product is the best solution to solve their problem that they didn't know they had, right? That takes time. So there needs to be that engagement that's going to drive over maybe a few months. But I think level setting that expectation, breaking those goals and objectives out, so sort of both ends of that spectrum, and communicating that up the chain, it goes a long ways to building what I will call a sustainable sort of demand gen or growth engine.
You use a couple of words that trigger me. One is I'm talking about marketing funnel, right? So this a mutual friend of ours, right, Christy Lee, me and her hosted a Forbes masterclass on why the marketing funnel is dead, right? It's an 1800 program. It was built in the 1800s. It's still being used. It's still being taught in MBA schools. But like in theory, we think our opinion is that it's dead and we should be looking at other aspects of it. What are your thoughts on that marketing funnel and the idea behind it? And do you think it's still relevant today?
Yeah, I think I'd probably agree that it's dead. And I say that because if I'm going to focus on the quote unquote funnel, I'm going to focus on the bottom first and I'm going to focus on the top. So I'm pretty much excluding the middle. I mean, maybe the activities are through the middle. But yeah, I go back again, right? I think the way that people buy things today, it's so different. And maybe COVID played a big part. My specialty is B2B software, right? So it's a little different than selling Coca-Cola or Pepsi. But if you think about it, when we went into lockdown or we started working from home, people got a lot more proficient with using the internet. Like they really did, right? Like people, that was their line of communication to the universe, was their computer, right? So I think for the most part, and I said this earlier, right? Like the days of generating demand, right? I think those days are over, or very, very difficult. So the traditional funnel was sort of built around that concept, right? Where you're sort of bringing people into the top and nurturing them through to the bottom, and then you close the deal, and it's very tidy and very clean, right? And then you had, I think it was McKinsey maybe that introduced a new funnel, right? It was like this weird spiral thing. Now I think the funnel is weird because I think people just come in and when they're ready to buy, like it's very difficult to influence what's happening for that point of purchase decision, right? And some colleagues of mine, I'll give them a shout out, John Lombardo and Peter Weinberg, that were at LinkedIn, and they ran the B2B Institute there. And I think it was Peter that said, those days are gone, and today it's just as important to acquire a memory as it is to acquire a lead, right? Yep. Because I think, especially again on the B2B side of things, it's becoming more and more similar to the B2C side, where branding is very, very important. Like you need to get that brand out there early and often, and it may make no sense at all because there's no tangible, thing that you can measure to say that you're being successful. But if you get the brand out there, if you can establish trust and credibility early on, if you can appeal to the selfish side of people, so it's not just, hey, I know that your business is looking to drive X amount of sales, right? It's like, hey, I know you want to be promoted. I know you want to make more money. The way you do that is to be better at your job. Hey, maybe my content strategy is actually going to be around you becoming better at your job, right? And we can help you because we have some knowledge there. I just think it's I wouldn't even say it's a funnel anymore. It's just like, it's sort of this nebula where people come out through the wormhole and they're ready to buy. So I would agree that the funnel's dead, I guess, right? I just don't know better way to sort of define what it looks like today.
Yeah, so Google defines it as the messy middle. That's what Google defines it as, right? So there's a big article called The Messy Middle, and then they talk about it. I'm a big fan of that concept. But you're right. And even in the B2B world, I think when you talk about the B2B to B2C, that's I'm also in the B2B world in tech, and the very much idea there is that, hey, look, at the end of the day, there is a consumer at the end. There's a guy who's going to sign the PO. There's a guy who's going to make a decision about, hey, are we going to go with the solution or not? And you have to target to them, and you've got to make him look better at their job, right? That is really what we, most companies should be doing is, hey, if I'm a CIO and I'm selling him a tech, my job is to make sure that he looks good. And, in our organization, I've been called sometimes by a CIO and said, hey, look, can you help me build a board deck about the stuff that you're doing with me? I'm like, yeah, I'll put it on your logo. I'll put it on your paper. I don't even need credit for it. My job is to look good. You look good, because if you look good, then you buy from me, right? Because I make you look good, right? No, and I think you're right on. So I think that's a good idea and strategy for people that are definitely trying to build pipeline and build just brand all across, right?
And I tell people all the time, my kids ask me, I have young children. They say, "Hey, what do you do for work?" I mean, they think I lock myself in this room and then I type on the keyboard.
Safe, totally safe.
But there was a time where they asked me, "What do you do for work?" I said, "Oh, I work in marketing." And they said, "What is marketing?" Like, right? And it got me thinking. It's like, what is actually marketing, right? And like the definition that I typically will provide to people now is like marketing's job is to make sales easier, right? And that's such a broad definition because there's a million and one ways to make sales easier. But I really do think that is the job of marketing in an organization, like make sales easier, right? And again, how we do that is going to vary from place to place.
I'm an adjunct I'm a guest professor sometimes for the digital media group at the University of Houston, and the first thing I do teach them is what is the purpose of marketing, and the first slide is always to support revenue growth. That's really it, and I tell them there's only 3 ways to do that, right? It's get new customers, sell more to existing customers, or sell more expensive stuff. Yep. Kind of it. There's nothing other than those 3 fundamentals that you can focus on. And you talked about it earlier, right? Breaking it down to very much just the fundamental of things. Like stop overthinking marketing, right? It's a very straightforward game. And you've got to play the emotions. You've got to be able to say, hey, look, this is, think of, I'll ask you the question, right? When you think of a marketing campaign, like, hey, I think this plays right on the money for everything that we're talking about, what is that? What is that campaign? What is that one instance that you can remember?
Oh, when we ran a campaign when I was at LinkedIn, this was probably my greatest achievement and my biggest failure. So this is an interesting story. And I consider myself a creative marketer, right? For better or for worse. Like sometimes it definitely is worse. We were tasked with running an account-based campaign to our top 250 customers. And at LinkedIn, those are very, very well-known brands, right? Like the Amazons, the Facebooks, the Googles of the world. So, we had a new product that was coming to market. It was a data and analytics product called LinkedIn. What was it called? I forget what it was called. Doesn't matter. But we said, hey, like, how do we get in front of very, very busy executives at these companies who probably don't think they need nor want a new data and analytics product, right? And how do we do it in a unique way? And granted, this is pre-COVID, so people are in an office, which people are increasingly becoming back in the office. So we said, you know what, let's go back to the well and let's do something that some people would consider to be pretty boring, which is direct mail. Let's like spice it up, right? Let's make it really interesting. So what we ended up doing is we ended up sending packages that inside the package, when they actually opened the lid of this box that we sent them, we had a little video player, which was based off of a ticket box that I received for a Taylor Swift concert back in the day. Opened it up, she was singing some song from Reputation or whatnot. We built one, a very similar, nice little product demo video. But then we had a toy. It was like a little viewfinder toy, and I've seen that done from other customers. But what we did, which was interesting and a little different, is we let data tell a story. So again, everything's a story, right? And the best stories are going to be the ones that are told through data. And if you really want to tug on the heartstrings or get somebody to pay attention, you're going to tell a story that's told with data that's very important to them, right? And being at LinkedIn, we had a lot of data. So what we did for the 25 accounts, we actually sent them these little toy viewfinders with a little disk of images that were data points for their specific company, which was really neat. Like we would do, I remember one of the pictures was, hey, 78% of available machine learning experts are in Southern Florida, something like that. I totally made up the 78%, but we put that in there because we knew that one of the key priorities for that company was to find machine learning engineers. So I think like that's maybe a little bit of a pie in the sky type of campaign for a lot of companies, but the underlying theme is that find the most pertinent thing to the person that you're trying to help and show that you can help them, right? And we did that very, very well with that campaign. That campaign went on to be very successful. So I think, what does that campaign look like? I mean, it doesn't matter what the details are. I think the most important thing is like show them that you can help them in the most pertinent, personal way to them. That's going to make their eyes, sort of perk up, and they're going to start thinking about you. I think that's how you have to think about things today.
So hold on. That seems like a success. You said this was your biggest failure. Well, What is the failure part of this?
The failure part is that we ended up launching it like 3 months late because we wanted to do custom data points for all these companies. So I learned very quickly that there needs to be some way to rein in complexity of what you're trying to do. So
Build the idea, build it, and they will come. Right.
Successful just a little bit late. Right.
So let's talk about failure real quick, and then we're gonna end with some kind of one of the things you said, but relevating it to today's world. But let's talk about failures real quick, because I think we love to learn from our failures, right? And I think it's always something that I teach a lot is like, hey, look, we do these podcasts, we do a lot of my LinkedIn content. You see that, and the hope is yours is the same, right? It's like, hey, I hope people are doing better than me, right? Because at the end of the day, everybody should do better, one way or another, right?
Absolutely.
I hope that we share something that you'll learn from, and you'll share something that I'll learn from. So let's talk about failure, right? Go back and tell me what do you think is one of your biggest failures?
Yeah, I mean, besides that campaign, I think early on in my career, I was working, I guess what you would define it as like a product marketing role. And I remember not necessarily loving the role at this company I was at, doing pretty well, but just not loving it. Like there was no passion behind what I was doing. And I remember at that point, wanting to really jump into sort of the demand gen, the growth side of things, right? The performance marketing world. And I remember just not being very good at communication and communication to not only my peers, but communication to my boss at the time, right? I could never sort of clearly let her know what I was interested in doing, right? And I think, that job ended up not working out so well because I was being paid to do something that I no longer really wanted to do, and it just didn't work out. So I think like that was a big part of my career in that I understood the importance of communication, right? And not just on what you want to work on, but even going so far to communicate your performance and how you're doing at something, right? So, today as an older, wiser gentleman, I always have some type of scorecard that I create early on in an engagement, early on in a job, because I want to make sure that there's communication both upwards, sideways, or down, that we know where we're trying to get to, right? And that we're measuring whether or not we're getting there. And I think that's critically important because, again, when you look back at like little failures, a lot of the times, and I don't know how it is for you, maybe different. A lot of times those failures are around communication, like they really are, right? Sometimes you're doing a great job and you're doing a great job, but somebody doesn't see it that way. And if you don't sort of measure what you're doing, if you don't level set at the onset of what you're trying to accomplish, like it just can be a bad conversation with a bad result. So I think like from a failure standpoint, there's been those times where it's just the communication wasn't where it needed to be, nor was there like the level setting that needed to happen. But again, you learn from those mistakes, right? You learn from those, and now it's a critical part of who I am as a marketer in terms of setting goals and making sure that everybody is sort of aligned around what those goals are and where we are at a specific time.
No, I think that's great. I definitely agree with that. I think it's always communication. It's funny, marketing and communication usually go hand in hand. We call it more comps in some cases, and it's important that
people don't teach communication like that. You don't learn that part for the most part at a lot of organizations unless they're very communications forward company. Like LinkedIn is a very communications forward company, so we learn communication, right? LinkedIn is also very big on professional development, so you learn how to be a manager there. I can't tell you how many times I talk to people who are complaining about having a bad manager or this person, that person. Those things wouldn't appear to be anything related to marketing, but they're so critical for your success as a marketer.
No, I agree. Sometimes you got to pick up the phone and call them. Like that's the part that bugs me the most of the time. Like, why can't you just people that have come through my team and other organizations, and I'm like, did you try calling them? No. Well, then you might have not gotten this problem if you just picked up the phone and just had a friendly conversation about this topic, right? Like, yep. It's not really that big of a deal if you just pick up the phone and call. Last thing, and I'm going to try to bring something you talked about earlier into modern times and get your thoughts on this, right? So earlier you talked about like playbooks, right? And so the idea of hey, you can't take one playbook to another, or you can't take one business idea from one company to another. And I say that because today in this like very competitive workplace, like we have friends that are looking for gigs, and I've got people that are coming out of college and looking for gigs, and you see these JDs and the job descriptions, and they're very specific and saying, hey, look, I need this, and you have to be industry expert. And the biggest example lately has been this, the Starbucks CEO, right? If you look at the new Starbucks CEO, Brian Nicole, he just came back from Chipotle. He's killed it at Chipotle. Before that, he killed it at Taco Bell. And the expectation is that I'm going to pay this guy $100 million to travel, commute, $100 million to commute back and forth. And then on top of that, some billions of dollars to basically do the same playbook, supposedly, right? Like, Talk to me about that concept. Like, what do you think and feel about that?
Yeah, I don't love it, right? Because I think, okay, maybe you'll get what they had at Chipotle, maybe, right? Although Chipotle, I feel like is going downhill. Maybe you'll get that, and that's fine. But like, I think if you were to maybe have an out of the box hire, like you might be able to get 2x what you would get out of it, right? So like, I understand, like people are looking for the safe hire, and like, and I've experienced this firsthand, you know, looking for new gigs as well. People are looking for the safe hire, but I don't necessarily know that they're looking for the best hire. Like, you know what I mean? It's a, I think I think that companies, like, I don't know what happened to this world. Like, everybody's risk averse these days, right? When the ones that are going to 10x are going to be the ones that are willing to take that risk. And I think you need to, you know, when I hire for my teams, I don't necessarily look for somebody that's ran this playbook or done this before. I tend to look for the smartest, most curious person with some common sense, right? Like, I think find that person, they're going to find the best way to accomplish what you have them set forth to accomplish, right? And I think, yeah, I mean, if you want to run the same playbook that's safe, maybe you'll get what some of your competitors get. But if you're truly looking to dominate the market, I think you do need to go outside the box a little bit and do something that's different than what everybody's doing. So I don't know. I mean, maybe based on what the old Starbucks CEO was, maybe I mean,
the bar's pretty low.
Yeah, it will potentially be a pretty good hire, but I don't know that it was the best hire. It was probably the safest hire, right?
Fair enough. Well, Jeff, any lasting words before you depart?
Oh, no lasting words. Yeah, I mean, if you can tell, I love chatting about anything. So if you want to have me on and we'll talk about something else, we can talk about your favorite Mad Men episode. I'm more than happy to do that. My favorite involves Palm Springs. I think it's season 2. Maybe it's
season 2. Yep. No. I think it's season 2 end. Yep.
Season 2, right? Yeah. That's
I'm pretty sure. I think so.
Jet's the episode name. That's the episode up.
It's been a minute since I watched the show, but I know exactly which episode you're talking about.
Great episode.
But Jeff, thanks for being on the show. It was a pleasure, guys. We'll put Jeff's details in the description of the podcast, and make sure you follow him on LinkedIn. And if you're looking for a consult, he's available always.
I'm available. Let's chat.
But thanks again, and everybody, please like, share, subscribe. We appreciate you guys. Ciao.
Thank you very much. It was great.
Men go mad.
He's gone mad.
Mad Men.
You're mad.
The man's mad.
Mad Men.
I'm mad.